In this video, I'll deploy and configure an Azure Application Gateway as a front end to the two Windows Server IIS servers that I deployed in an availability set in the previous video. Not only does Azure Application Gateway allow me to load balance traffic across these two nodes, with traffic being redirected in the event one becomes unavailable, it also allows me to enable security protection from distributed denial of service and common web application attacks like SQL injection. Now, the first thing I'll do is test the IIS deployments from the previous video. To start in the Azure portal, the first thing we do is navigate to the VMs node. We select Java IIS 1 and we go to network setting. Here we're going to create a NSG rule to allow port 80 traffic from my personal IP address. This will allow us to test that the IIS website is available to the internet. We create an inbound port rule. We specify the source as my IP address. We set the service to HTTP. We set a priority of 115. We give the rule the name HTTP test inbound and a description that just says HTTP test from my IP. We click add and that rule is added to this virtual machine's network adapter network security group. I return to the virtual machines page. I select Java IIS2 and I perform the same operation, allowing port 80 in from my IP address so that I'm able to test that IIS has been correctly installed and configured. To test this all works, I open a new tab in Edge and I enter the fully qualified domain name I've mapped to the public IP address of each one of the hosts. And for each host, I can see a slightly modified default website for Internet Information Services, proving that those hosts are now available. I close the tabs and return to the Azure portal. The next step I need to take is to create an additional subnet on my virtual network, which will host the application gateway. I do this by going to the virtual networks blade, selecting the virtual network associated with my IIS VMs, selecting the subnets node, selecting add subnet, setting the name to app.gw subnet, leaving the starting address as 10.0.1.0, which is the next subnet up from the subnet used for the IIS VMs. Whilst the whole of other settings here about privacy and subnet delegation, we don't need to configure any of those. We just need the basic subnet. Now that we've got the application gateway subnet in place, what we need to do is configure the network security groups on each VM's network adapter to accept traffic from the application gateway subnet on port 80. I select Java IIS1's NSG. I select the source subnet as the application gateway subnet, set the service as HTTP, provide a priority and a name for the rule, and click add. I then repeat the process for the second NSG for Java IIS2. Now we've got the NSGs and the target subnet configured, it's time to deploy the application gateways. So we search for application gateways, we click create, we select application gateway. Here I'm putting it in the same resource group as the IIS VMs. I give it the name Java App GW2. I keep the gateway in the same region as the VMs. I'm keeping the default settings of a standard gateway and leaving it as IPv4 only. On the Configure Virtual Network dropdown, I select VNet Java IIS1 VNet, which is the same VNet used by the virtual machines. I then make sure that it has chosen the application gateway subnet I configured to host the application gateway. On the front ends page, I choose to create a new public IPv4 address, which I call Java App GW PIP. On the backends page, I choose Add a Backend Pool. I give the pool a name, and I specify the private IP addresses of Java IIS1 and Java IIS2. On the configuration page, I select Add a Routing Rule. I give the rule a name, and then I create a listener and specify its name. I make sure that it's listening for HTTP traffic on port 80 and that it's a basic listener type. On the backend targets tab, I select the target type as a backend pool, and then I select the backend pool that I just created with the two IIS servers. I select add new backend setting. I provided a name and specify that it's going to use port 80. Here I can configure things like cookie affinity, connection draining, and dedicated backend connection. But here, all we're doing is using the defaults. I also need to specify a priority, which I forgot earlier. I choose add, and the routing rule is added. I complete the wizard and deploy the gateway. Now that the gateway is deployed, we can look at the properties of the gateway. So I select Application Gateways, I select Java App G2. I can see here that I can select the public IP address of the gateway, which I'll use in a minute. I go to backend pools and I can see my IIS backend pool. I can see the health of the nodes in the pool. So if something goes wrong, I can check them here. I open up a new tab and I paste in the public IP address of the gateway, and I click refresh, and you can see that it's load balancing between Java IIS 1 and Java IIS 2. The next thing I do is I go back to the application gateway and I select Web Application Firewall. I then select that I want to create a Web Application Firewall policy. I give it a name, and I also add in bot protection. This is all of the protection settings that can be added to inspect incoming traffic that's going to be routed through the Web Application Gateway. So once I've created the policy and saved it, I can show you the properties of the policy. So I select the newly created policy, and we can see here on Managed Rules, we have both the bot protection rules and all of the OWASP rules, which protect against the most common web application attacks. In this video, I configured Azure Application Gateway to distribute traffic across an availability set and to provide security protection for the web apps that availability set hosts. In future videos, I'll also configure monitoring, disaster recovery, and other security settings for this particular deployment. Hope you found it informative, and I'll see you in the next video.